So, today I want to talk about America's fascism problem. There is currently a huge issue right now within the United States. After January 6th, when insurrection occurred, where people felt emboldened to storm the Capitol, and many of that group decided it was appropriate to try to actively kill and or harm people who represent, at least in theory, the democratic principles of the United States, who actively represent people within the US. It strikes me as odd that right after that event, that there would be so many people within the government framework to still come out and support these same ideas while paying lip service to how horrible and bad the insurrection was. Furthermore, I think it's even more problematic that so many of these same Republicans are now calling for some form of unity and consensus. And worse yet, that some of the Democrats are willing to capitulate to these requests. Like Biden has been coming out and saying that, well, we need to focus on the peace and future of this country. Generally speaking, I am someone who believes that we should have a right to vocalize our perspectives and bring them into the forefront of our political discussions, that we should be able to talk about difference of opinion. Unfortunately, I think we've reached a point where difference of opinion is no longer what we're talking about. We're talking about active attempts at sedition. We are talking about active attempts to overthrow the voices of other people within the institution. There comes a point where, when you look at the body as a whole, you have to be able to accept the reality and diagnose when something's wrong, when something has gone horribly wrong. Now, I am not advocating for any citizen of the United States to be put on lists or to be put in any sort of situation where they should not be able to express themselves. What I am asking for is that we diagnose a problem within the government itself. And we advocate for talking, at the very least, about what we need to be doing to squash some of the perspectives of incitements of violence and the a level of appeasement that is being given to people who have supported the suppression of other people's democratic votes and perspectives. When you have illness within the body, when you have an issue that is so severe that it requires a thought process, an internal thought process of if we need to remove something, it's something that shouldn't be taken without serious thought and consequence. No doctor sits there and says, you know what, the body is ill and we need to take out an organ or maybe amputate a limb without seriously questioning whether or not that organ or that limb can be saved and protected. But I think at this point, within the United States, the right arm has grown so sickly and so diseased that we need to amputate it. I think people forget what we're actually talking about right now. We are not talking about difference of opinion. We are not talking about difference of perspective. We are talking about an actual group of people who committed acts within the framework of the United States to undermine one of the key components of how it functions. You have, within the structure of the United States right now, 5 senators who objected to certifying the results of democratically chosen positions for both Arizona and Pennsylvania, and 3 who objected to one of them. Within the House of Representatives, you have 120 who objected to both, and 19 who rejected to one, but not the other. And I'm just going to leave this list of names up so people can see what we're talking about. Many of these names are the exact same names that appeared on the members of the House that backed Texas's challenge to the Supreme Court when Texas and 19 other states tried to file a lawsuit claiming that the positions of 2 other states within the Union were problematic. If you look at these lists, there's a remarkable similarity between them. When you have people within the United States framework actively voting against the democracy of the country and against the active perspective and opinion and voice of others within the country, you need to start questioning whether this is functioning as planned or whether this is a disease that needs to be cut off. And I am at the point where I believe that every single name on that list needs to be removed from power. Not because they're voicing some sort of objection or concern, but the system itself, the government itself, has already determined through all of the means, both democratic and some of the less democratic principles, that the fraudulent vote calls, that everything else has not been an issue, that these are all lies, that these are all fraudulent. There has been no substantial claim. There has been examination after examination after examination of these things. We have paid it all the lip service that it needs. And for people to still be wanting to not just question it, but to actively suppress and vote to suppress the democratic positions of people in 2 different states, you need to start calling that what it is, an active call to sedition, an active call to undermine democracy, to undermine the actual value of people, not corporations, not individuals who, have wealth and status and power and can wield it in that way. We are talking about the people of Pennsylvania and Arizona. We, on the left, allowed for Donald Trump to take power. You can't equate these across the board. People on the left have been calling for what Donald Trump was and what his followers would represent for 4 years, and we allowed them into power. We gave the benefit of the doubt for 4 years, and they have actively undermined everything this country has stood for. We didn't come out and say, you know what, we're gonna storm this, we're gonna take him out immediately, and we're gonna do all these things, and we're gonna silence that. No, we gave it the benefit of the doubt. They performed actions. They continue to perform actions. This is not the time to call for peace. This is not the time to wave the olive branch and say, you know what, we just want to unify the country, because as long as you still have that illness, the body as a whole is at risk. You cannot, in any circumstance, leave that sickly arm the way that it is, because the infection will spread throughout the rest of the body and we will sink and die. Sometimes there are medically necessary options. And yes, it is very hard, and it will be an extremely difficult process. And it is one that you don't have a guarantee will work. But we've seen time and time again historically that not performing this procedure, when it has been properly diagnosed within the institution and government itself, causes more harm than good. And again, I need to reiterate this. I am not saying that an average citizen right now should be put on a list, or that we should be talking about an average person who maybe holds some of the beliefs that have been brought about by the perspectives of these government officials. What I'm advocating for is that the government officials themselves, who do not deserve nor have the protections of the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights are designed to protect the people, not the voices of people who actively suppress other people's voices within the institution. People can be misguided and have different perspectives and opinions. I, however, do need to call into account people who are actively calling for violence, who are actively calling for violence, not for the rising up of other people's voice, not for the goal of making sure that people in the country are heard, but to actively suppress other people's voices. And I am speaking directly to the calls of action of fascists that are occurring in the United States right now. At this moment in time, the same groupings of people who called for the actions on January 6th still feel emboldened to perform more actions. The Washington Post covered this fairly well, and I'm just going to read some of this. The conservative sites and niche conservative places and parts of Twitter and Facebook in the mainstream have started calling for certain locations to have events, including, quote, an armed march on all state capitals, including localized events in all 50 states. Refuse to be silenced, said one online post cited by this group, calling for an armed march on Capitol Hill and all state capitals for January 17th, the last Sunday of Trump's polarizing presidency. Another post called for action at D.C. and all state capitals and was signed by, quote, common folk who are tired of being tread upon, declares we were warned. Online chatter was organized in some cases around hashtags such as hashtag storm the Capitol and included threats to kill congressional leaders. One poster responded on a pro-Trump forum, he can't exactly openly tell you to revolt. This is the closest he'll ever get. The frustrating part about all of this is that at this point, the positions and perspectives that members of Congress and that members of the U.S. government have called for no longer represent the interests of the people as a whole. They do not represent the democratic procedure. They represent a wound in this country. You cannot separate what happened on the 6th of January from the perspectives that have called for it. At this point, you cannot say, well, I didn't actually ask for there not to be violence within the government. I didn't ask for people to do this. I just want to express my opinion. At this point, you are the government, and you are accountable for the violence that you incited. And so, again, I propose that we need to cut off this arm of government, this section of people who have actively stood in the way of actual reform in this country for however long, who are not just stopping reform, but are actively allowing and enabling the people who want to incite acts of violence against the country, against where we are. They do not deserve nor have the rights and protections of the Bill of Rights. They do not have the First Amendment rights. You don't get to claim as a member of the U.S. government that you are somehow going to call into account your perspective being heard on your ability to undermine and undercut the institutions that you're supposed to be representing. This isn't some sort of McCarthyism. This isn't some sort of cancel culture. This isn't some sort of issue. This is members of government being asked to be called into account for the actions that they committed through their words and inciting sedition and acts of insurrection within the country. And I also want to just bring this out to a global scale, because what happened on the 6th is not just a U.S. problem. Fascism has never just been a U.S. problem. When fascism rises in the U.S., it tends to promote other countries to do it. Hitler was famous for looking at the U.S. eugenics movement as part of his goals and ideas. The U.S. right has always been part of this. And we allowed this to happen, from Reconstruction all the way through allowing eugenics movement, all the way through now with the people who represent all of these right-wing ideologies. There are currently far-right groups around the world celebrating what happened on the 6th. Now, whether or not other incidences happen, whether the 17th or the 20th ends up happening, the dates that are being called for, or not, and whether you want to argue whether or not the 6th was even effective in the first place, the fact that there are groups emboldened by it means that there needs to be an active pushback against these perspectives. Because if you appease them, and if you make them feel safe, that they can express themselves, and you let them declare it a victory, they will. Because it is all about aesthetics. They took a symbol, and the symbol was good enough to represent everything else. Fascism is the kind of ideology that will take the circle peg and slam it into the square hole until it fits. They will keep smashing against it until it works, until they break the entire system. They don't care about making their ideology solid or a platform that works. And they will keep advocating that we are silencing the voice of their movement, while they actively seek to silence the voice and perspectives of everyone else. When you have a group speaking out against democracy, when you have them appealing to authoritarianism, when you literally have people in the movement calling Trump king, they lose their legitimacy to defend their position of democracy. They literally lose their ability to claim that. And I think we need to address that as the wound that it is. And I just want to call this into account, the fact, again, that it's worldwide now. You have far-right folks in Europe who can hardly shut up about the insurrection in the United States. Italy has a neo-fascist group. Germany has a neo-Nazi group. You have the Nordic resistance movement in Scandinavia and Finland. You have the Ukrainian far-right channels who are now referencing this with praise in terms of certain neo-Nazi texts. You have a branch of neo-Nazi channels who portrayed one of the people who died in the Capitol as basically a martyr, saying, quote, "She lived as a patriot, died as a patriot, and is never to be forgotten." On several accounts, they saw images of Russian neo-Nazis laying flowers at the U.S. Embassy to remember her in Moscow. America, we have a fascist problem. The people keep saying, oh, the left, the left, the left, the left, BLM, Antifa, all this stuff. We have a fascist problem. These are the people who have actively come out and said, democracy does not deserve to continue, that the voice of the people in 2 states of the Union should be silenced, and we will respond to this through insurrection and by attacking the lives of other human beings. This branch of government needs to go. The people who incite violence need to be investigated, not because they are citizens, but because free speech ends at that call for violence. People who are just going about their everyday lives and who are questioning things, who are, genuinely curious and are trying to explore this, who have been essentially brainwashed by this section of government trying to seize power and to remove itself and undercut democracy, I'm not advocating for that. We've seen where that leads, and I don't want to be that person. And I don't want us to be in that place. But can we address the wound, at least within the government itself, that's inciting violence and is inciting sedition? Can we address that? Because if we don't, fascism will rise, and we know what that looks like historically, and we know what that means for people with a broad variety of perspectives who come from a broad variety of places and, people of different ethnicities, races, etc. are going to be some of the first people targeted. They always are. Trump showed that in his presidency, and it will continue actively. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.